Have you noticed something? Russia is back in the news. And here to talk about that fact and several others that are all affiliated with Russia and Bible prophecy is author, lecturer, pastor, Mark Hitchcock. Mark, welcome to Prophecy Watchers.
Well, great. It's good to be with you. It's my first time to be with you guys, so it's a real privilege.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
And Mark, you have just completed a book, and it's called Russia Rising. Talk about something that's in the news. Russia had sort of slid back to the back pages of the newspaper for a number of years, but not lately. Suddenly, Russia is rising, as you say in the title of your book.
Oh, no, that's right. I mean, I was watching someone not long ago in the news, and they said, Russia, Russia, Russia. Everything's about Russia. And, Of course, with the breakup of the Soviet Union back in the early 1990s, everybody thought that the Russian bear had gone into permanent hibernation. Russia had kind of gone into eclipse. And of course, we've seen a lot of aggression, with Georgia, with Crimea and the Ukraine. There have been a lot of aggression. All the hoopla around the elections, the presidential elections, and tampering with that. And so Russia's everywhere, and they really are extending their footprint throughout the Middle East and really attempting to do it throughout the world.
Chapter 1 of your book is entitled "There's a Bear in the Woods," and that's kind of a fanciful way of symbolizing Russia, but it's biblical because there is a bear in Scripture.
Well, there is. And what's so fascinating to me is about the Bible. To me, this is a great proof of the inspiration of the Bible. About over 2,500 years ago, the Jewish prophet Ezekiel writes about a group of nations that's going to attack Israel in the end time. And one of those nations that's mentioned is Russia. And here we are. Israel's back in their land since 1948. Almost 40% of the Jews in the world are there. And at the same time that's happening, Russia now is rising to become this great menace in the world. And I think this is a foreshadow or a setting of the stage of exactly what Ezekiel predicted so long ago. It's in the headlines, and yet Ezekiel talked about it so long ago.
Now, there's nothing really new about taking the view that Ezekiel 38 is talking about Russia and an alliance of nations around Russia. But in the last few years, there have been diverging opinions about what Ezekiel 38 is really talking about.
That's right.
Like, are we really talking about Russia, or are we talking about maybe someplace else that people have misinterpreted as Russia? And in your studies, I'm sure you've gone back to the people who were writing in the 19th century, and you quote many of the people who were writing at that time who just openly said, this is Russia.
That's right.
It's being mentioned in Ezekiel 38. Let's go into that a little bit.
Well, I think that's important because a lot of people accuse people like myself and you and others who believe that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is about Russia. By the way, Persia is mentioned there too, which is Iran. So there's a lot of nations that are in the news today. But they accuse us of what's called newspaper exegesis, where we're just taking the news and then we take that to the Bible and find something that fits.
Right.
But I think when we go back and see that back, as you said, in the 19th century, there were people who were saying that Rosh here is Russia in Ezekiel 38. Well, they can't be accused of newspaper exegesis.
That's true.
Back in their day. For instance, Wilhelm Gesenius, one of the great Hebrew grammarians and scholars, in his lexicon says that Rosh here is undoubtedly the Russians, and goes on to give other description. That's in 1846 that he said that. Yeah. And Kyle and Delitzsch, two very well-known Old Testament scholars, they don't say that Rosh is Russia, but they say it is a proper name here. It's not just translated chief or prince or something like that, but it's a proper name. And Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown mention the idea that this is Russia. So there's a lot of writings from centuries past where people took this to be Russia. Now, I always hasten to add, that doesn't mean just because they said that it's true, but it does get rid of the argument that what we're engaging in today is some kind of newfangled view that's come along.
It's a view that's been around a while.
Yes.
I'm holding a King James Bible right now, and Ezekiel 38:3 says, Thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And the idea of chief prince in the King James sort of obliterates some of the later translations of the Bible, which use the word Rosh. And let's talk about that for a minute, because in modern Hebrew, if you pick up a newspaper and read an article about Russia, Russia is called Rosh in Hebrew,
Right.
to this day.
Right.
So there's really ample ground to advance that idea.
Well, there is, and again, there's this difference of opinion whether Rosh here is an adjective translated chief or head, or whether it's a proper name. Again, Keil and Delitzsch, two great Old Testament scholars, two German scholars in the 19th century, they say that it should be translated as a proper name. The Septuagint, which is the early Greek translation of the Old Testament, translates Rosh as the word Ros, or Ros, which is a proper name. Another point that supports the idea here that Russia is involved in this invasion in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is just the geography that's mentioned in the passage. 3 times in Ezekiel 38 and 39, it says that this invading force, at least part of it, comes from the farthest parts, or some translations say the remotest parts of the north. And Ezekiel 38 says that Israel is the navel of the earth, or the center of the earth. Mm-hmm. So you go north and draw a line from there, and you go to Russia.
Yes, you do.
So you have the word Rosh that's mentioned here. You have actually a group of people back in Ezekiel's day known as the Rus or the Ros or the Rasapu people. Mm-hmm. And I've got extensive quotes in there in the book and evidence to this. So, I developed that early in the book because I want people to understand that this is really in the Bible. This isn't just something we're making up. We want to establish that. And then we get on to a lot of the other issues at hand. But I think it's an important one to establish at the beginning.
Now, one of the things you do in this book that I really like is you flesh out the personality of Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. A lot of people almost like the guy. That is to say, he smiles a lot and he seems charming. And of course, people are trying now to confabulate the Russian government, the United States government, for political reasons, and there's a lot of contemplation of what's really going on behind the scenes, and meanwhile, Vladimir just smiles.
Sure.
Every time you see him, he's smiling.
Oh yeah.
And you call him maybe the richest man on the face of the earth.
Well, that's right. It's interesting. He's worth somewhere between 70 and $200 billion. Bill Gates is worth 80 billion. So if Vladimir Putin's worth 70 billion, he's the second wealthiest man in the world. If he's worth 200 billion, he's worth almost 3 times what the second wealthiest man would be in the world. So he has enriched himself in unbelievable ways off of the Russian people and the Russian government, and really just centralized power in himself. So I call him in the book the rising czar, because basically we're back to czarist Russia. He's the one who's in control, and he's a former KGB agent. And really their goal there, his goal, is to destroy Europe. He wants to divide up NATO and basically just expand Russian influence throughout the world. And right now he's doing a pretty good job on all fronts.
Yeah, you point out that he's been engaged in a military buildup behind the scenes.
Oh, yes.
And people don't know about these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, what's interesting, I'd read just the other day, Sweden is so concerned about Russia's military buildup. Sweden has increased its own military budget and instituted conscription, or a draft. Now, that's in Sweden. This is one of the
amazing.
Most peaceful places in the world.
Yeah.
And they're ratcheting up their budget on military and instituting a draft because they see the rise of what's happening there in Russia. And whenever the Swedes get alarmed about something, that something's going on. Of course, they're right there in the neighborhood.
They are in the neighborhood. It's not too far away. And now that we're talking about Russia and military buildup, Ezekiel 38 really talks about a military movement. In other words, it's all about an invasion.
Right.
And let's talk about the invading forces for a minute, because you spend quite a bit of time on that.
Well, that's right. When you read Ezekiel 38, verses 1 through 6, there are 10 names there, 10 proper names. And the first one is Gog. This is often called the prophecy of Gog and Magog. Gog is the leader of this invasion. I call him you have the commander and then kind of the coalition.
Yeah.
The commander is Gog because it says he's of the land of Magog, and he's addressed several times. So obviously he's a person. We don't know who Gog is at the time, but he's of the land of Magog, and he's the prince of Rosh. We have Meshech, Tubal, so on. My understanding of this is that Magog, I would say, is the underbelly of the old Soviet Union and nations in Central Asia. And about 60 million Muslims live there. It's the ancient land of the ancient Scythians. The land of Rosh, I believe, is Russia. Now, Meshech and Tubal were often considered Moscow and Tobolsk. But I think they're better identified in modern-day Turkey, and I give the reasoning for that in the book. I think that's fairly obvious nowadays. Gomer was Germany. I think Gomer is the ancient Sumerians that were in Turkey. Togarma or Beth Togarma, I think, is in Turkey. So 4 of the nations mentioned here are from modern-day Turkey, which their president, their Erdogan, is taking them rapidly back to their Islamist roots.
Yeah, and speaking of Erdogan, this man is evil. I've been reading about him, and he wants nothing more or less than to have his chunk of he wants the old caliphate to sweep across and take Israel.
Right.
So he would be a very strong player. Now, let me ask you this. There are a lot of people are saying today that the prophecy of Gog, land of Magog, is Turkey and not Russia. Speak to that for a minute, because you do include Turkey in your overview.
Well, actually, that's part of the Islamic view, really, of Yajuj and Majuj in the Quran. They take this to be really a reference to Turkey, which is interesting. But to me, when you look at the nation of Rosh that's mentioned here, that name that's mentioned, again, a people that existed back then, the Ras, the Rasapu, that were in there around north of the Black Sea, in the area of southern Russia today. Again, and you go back and you look at people like Gesenius in the 1800s that identified this as Russia. Some people even identify Magog as Russia. There are a lot of current scholars who do, and I mention a lot of them in the book as well.
Yeah.
But again, whether you take Magog as Russia or Rosh as Russia or both, this geographical notation of the remotest parts of the north, I think, really kind of cinches the deal that it's Russia, because certainly Turkey is north of Israel, but Russia is the farthest north, or the remotest north from Israel. So I think they're clearly involved in this.
I did an exercise on a globe many years ago, and that if you just trace a longitude from Jerusalem straight to the North Pole, you go within, I think, 25, 30 miles of Moscow.
Right.
It's just right on the same longitude as Israel. So it would be the uttermost parts of the north.
But I have Turkey here involved. So 4 of the 10 names here, I believe, are related to Turkey. You've got Persia mentioned in Ezekiel 38:5, which that was just changed in March of 1935 from Persia to Iran. And now it's the Islamic Republic of Iran. You have Ethiopia mentioned here, which actually is Cush, which was the ancient nation south of Egypt, which is the modern-day Sudan, which North Sudan now is an Islamic nation. Then you have Libya mentioned, which was the nation just to the west of ancient Egypt. And of course, Libya has fallen into all kinds of disarray. Actually, in the book, I have several quotations in there, a lot of information about Russia and what they're doing there in Libya, promoting a strong man there that they kind of have a lot of influence with. So when you put all of this together, you see that this is Russia and a group of Islamic nations that hate Israel, that surround Israel, that would love nothing more than to come in and to drive the Jewish people into the sea.
Wow. The thing I love about your book, and I'm serious about this, this is my personal copy right here, and if you'll notice along the edge, I've got these little yellow sticky tabs, which I always put in the books that I read, so I can go back and quickly look at what I consider to be key passages. The thing you've achieved, and I love it when people do this, is you've made all of these points you're talking about very easy to follow. You've made your case clearly without obfuscation, and congratulations on that, because this can be a very complicated topic, and it's been mused about and maundered over for a long time now, and it needs some clarity, and I've got to tell you, you've brought clarity to it.
Well, I appreciate that, but one of the things I want to do is, whether someone reads the book and agrees with me or not, I just want them to understand that the case can be made. and then they need to read the book and read the evidence and see if I've made the case. And if they have a different case that they can make and want to look at, then that's fine. But I guess over the years I've gotten weary of people saying, well, this whole thing about Russia, people are just making this up. We're really not making it up. There's evidence for that. But again, if someone doesn't agree with that, that's fine. They can weigh the evidence and make a decision for themselves.
Dropping down to verse 8 in Ezekiel 38, it says, after many days thou shalt be visited in the latter years. Thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword.
That's right.
Now, this prophecy is timed and dated as happening in the latter years or latter days. And are we living in the latter days?
Well, we are. We're in the latter days right now, or the last days of the church age. I think the latter years or latter days here is the latter years for the nation of Israel. So I believe one of these days the rapture will take place and will end the last days of the church. And then I believe the latter years or the last days for Israel then will begin during the tribulation period on into the millennial kingdom, the millennial reign of Christ. So I believe this is looking at a time, the view I take is this will happen after the rapture, is when these events will take place, when the latter years for Israel begin during their time of tribulation.
The book is worth it, folks, if you just go to page 144. I'll just tell you this. It has a prophetic checklist. It's got, 13, 14, 15, it has 20 items. It's worth the price of the book to get the prophetic checklist. And I'm giving away a little secret here. But it's clear. You've made it really clear. And I like the book for that reason.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting that's happening today, too, though, I think that is bringing clarity to this whole situation. Russian troops right now are in Syria, right on the northern border of Israel, as are Iranian troops. So Iran and Russia have used all this chaos and turmoil in Syria as a subterfuge to bring their armies there. You have Russian Air Force, Iranian troops.
Yeah.
They're right there on the northern border of Israel. And here they are poised. There's a Russian encampment I read not long ago, like 5 to 8 miles across the Syrian border. And of course, all this chaos with ISIS, I don't see ISIS myself as fulfilling a prophecy, specific prophecy, but I see them again as part of the stage setting of just creating this chaos. And so Russia and Iran are coming in to bolster the brutal Assad regime in Syria, but there they are right on Israel's northern border and really poised at some point when the time is right to fulfill these prophecies that were written over 2,500 years ago.
Well, you gave me a lead in to another book you've written. It's called ISIS, Iran, and Israel. And by the way, while we're at it, Mark has also written this book, 101 Answers to Questions About the Book of Revelation. And believe me, there are a lot of questions about the book of Revelation. And I love the way you write, great clarity, and not a lot of flowery language. You just get straight to the topic and you make it as clear as possible. And for that reason, I'm saying if you'd really like to understand the ins and outs of some specific Bible prophecy, Mark Hitchcock has done a good job of clarifying. And I speak from years of experience, having read dozens of books, and congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I say about the book of Revelation, I have the opportunity to teach that a lot at Dallas Seminary. And I tell my students, I don't have all the answers, but I pretty much know the questions. So, you go through something enough time, you figure out what the questions are, what people want to know, what the issues are. And I've tried to answer a lot of the basic questions that people have.
So we have the man, Vladimir. We have the land of Russia. This is an interesting development to me because when people think of Russia, they invariably go back in their minds to the old Soviet Union, to the days of Gorbachev, and they think of that kind of Russia as being this formidable wall of communism. But today, things have changed so much. For example, Vladimir Putin claims to be a Christian, a Russian Orthodox.
Right.
He claims to be a businessman. That is, he presents himself as a businessman, which is not what you think of when you think of communism. He's working with the oligarchs and controlling the wealth of Russia. So he really has changed what we think about Russia.
Well, it's really all about image today. We know that from internet and from television and all these things. And he's worked very hard to develop this image. But behind that image, he's still an old KGB operative. I mean, he's brutal. I mean, he's a murderer. I mean, he's murdered, reporters, opponents there, rivals. And he'll stop at nothing to accomplish the purposes he desires.
Well, but he's very telegenic. Actually,
He is.
he smiles a lot, got a personality. People, and you think of him as kind of maybe a new Russian. Maybe not as mean, nasty, and ugly as the old Russians.
Right.
But you're saying no. He's one of the old Russians.
That's right. He is. He's much smoother, much slicker today in what he does, but he's still the same. And it's kind of interesting. I've been asked by people quite a bit. Could Vladimir Putin be Gog? That's mentioned here in this passage, just leader of this Russian Islamic invasion. I like what Joel Rosenberg, a lot of the viewers may be familiar with his writings.
I'm sure they are.
Yes, very astute. But he says that Vladimir Putin, we can't say for sure if he's Gog, but he's certainly Gog-esque. And I like that. That's a really good way to put it. He's Gog-esque. He has the traits and characteristics we would expect in Gog. But again, as with a lot of things in Bible prophecy, time will tell. Whether he is the person, but if he's not the person, he's at least paving the way for someone else to rise up and be a great autocratic ruler and run things and bring this to pass.
Now, looking again at the prophetic checklist, you mentioned here a kind of a sequence of events by which or through which Russia is pulled into the Middle East. And the language of Ezekiel 38 is that God says, I am going to cause you to come down into the Middle East. Let's talk about how that unfolds.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think, whoever this leader is, this Gog in the end, this leader of Russia and this Islamic horde of nations, is going to believe that he's coming in willingly on his own. It's going to be his idea. Just like in the Old Testament with Nebuchadnezzar.
Right.
Nebuchadnezzar, everything he did, he willingly did it. He wanted to do it. He thought he was in charge, but God was the one behind what was happening. And it's the same thing here. God is going to put hooks in the jaws, it says here, and draw them there. And what will be used to do that, again, we don't know for sure. It could be that, Israel has to some point try to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. And that could engender this hatred, and they're allied together, and that's used somehow to draw them in. It could be the vast resources that have been discovered in the land of Israel, all the gas that's there and oil that they've discovered. We don't really know what it will be for sure, but there's going to be something at that time that's going to draw them there. But I think certainly Russia's alliance with all these Islamic nations will be part of the hook that's going to draw them in there.
And we see the alliance, and of course, the alliance between Persia and Russia today.
Sure.
And I call it Persia. It's old Persia. Iran is just kind of a nickname.
Right.
But they're busily producing nuclear weapons right now in Iran, thanks to previous administrations that have given them a sort of carte blanche. And so you have sort of a nuclear axis between today's, and the Russians have, some say maybe the largest stockpile of active nuclear weapons in the world.
Yes.
So between Persia and Russia, it's horrible.
It is, yeah. Russia does. They actually have more nuclear warheads than we do in the United States. So they have more than anyone. Obviously, they've been helping Iran with nuclear facilities. Now, they haven't given them nuclear weapons, but these nuclear power plants and facilities. But that's technology that they're receiving from them. It's just amazing to me when you go read through a passage like this and you read through everything that's going to happen, and you read through the nations that are listed here. What we see today in the world is paving the way for this. It's setting the stage. It foreshadows it. Whatever word like that you want to use. We see how in a very short time the events that are in this passage of Scripture could come to fulfillment.
Now, we've barely touched the actual Scriptures, and we're talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39 here, which have been the subject of I don't know how many books over the years. But Russia Rising by Mark Hitchcock, in my opinion, brings it all together. If you want a good, clear read on the subject that integrates economics, finance, international politics, the events that are coming about today that you're seeing on television, including our current presidency, the relationship between our current president, Donald Trump, and Russia has been in the papers for months.
It has
and
been.
that can't be any accident, right?
Well, no, that's true. And part of the problem for all of us just watching this again is this whole idea of fake news.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what's real anymore
Right.
and what's true. But the fact that Russia is rising and the bear has come storming out of hibernation and is in the news everywhere today, that's an undeniable fact. And I think it has significance for biblical prophecy. And the subtitle of the book that I've written is called Tracking the Bear in Bible Prophecy. And when we track the bear in Bible prophecy, we realize the footprints of the bear ultimately lead right into the land of Israel.
Well, let me just present this book to you. Of course, it's in our Prophecy Watchers online bookstore. Go to prophecywatchers.com. Just click the online bookstore and scroll down, and you'll find Mark Hitchcock's name and his books. And this package of 3 books, Russia Rising, ISIS, Iran, and Israel, and this one about Revelation, 101 questions. 101 answers to questions about the book of Revelation. We're putting this together, calling it the Russia and Revelation package. And for your gift of $50 to Prophecy Watchers, we'll send this to you. Again, you'll find this, by the way, in the online bookstore. Scroll down and you'll find this package called the Russia and Revelation package. And I would urge you, if you want to know about Russia and what's behind the news today, I think Mark has nailed it, quite frankly. In the midst of a lot of controversy and maybe argumentation about what's going on, he just kind of shoots right through to the main subject, and I appreciate the book.
Well, thanks a lot. It's great to be here with you, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come here and talk about it, and we'll have to do this again before long.
We will. 30 minutes goes by like that. Yeah. We really haven't had a chance to talk much about subject matter, except to say that I think Mark has a very clear picture laid out in terms of what's actually in Scripture. And by the way, just check out our online bookstore. You're going to find Mark Hitchcock's name and a list of the books that he's written. And he's a good writer. Take it from me. I love a book that you can read and it makes a lot of sense and it doesn't take you off into places that you didn't want to go. So you've done it.
Amen. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's kind.
Mark Hitchcock, thanks for coming by Prophecy Watchers. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You'll have to come again. I'm sure you're going to be watching current events.
Oh, yes.
Like a hawk.
Well, that's right. And I think, with Russia, they're just really beginning to emerge, I think. We're going to see this accelerate more and more, I think, as the days go by.
And maybe exponentially.
That's right, maybe exponentially. And that gives us hope that the rapture could be at any time.
We do believe that. We're watching. And in fact, we always close this broadcast, Mark. And by the way, come again and talk to us. We haven't had nearly enough time.
We'll do it.
Hey, keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.